All right, guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me interview you. It would be good for those that hadn't heard you speak yet or haven't heard you on the podcast yet, just to quickly introduce yourself. And maybe, Chris, let's start with you.
Right. My name is Chris. I'm a solution architect at The Digital. I started my Odoo journey as a freelancer and then started a Odoo agency in Antwerp called Diginev. But recently I joined The Digital as a solution architect and very happy to be here.
Nice. Sam?
My name is Sam. I'm one of the co-founders of The Digital. I mostly focus on the Shopify part of things. And it's impossible that you don't know Chris yet because we had a wonderful podcast not so long ago.
Awesome. I think it would be interesting for the audience to also hear how you got in touch with Shopify, and let's just take Sam as the Shopify guru, and let's take Chris as the Odoo guru today. How did you get in touch with, each software?
Right. Well, let me start. So, as I said earlier, I was a freelance web developer, and I was basically working on all types of web development projects, like some Wix websites or some websites on maybe what is it called again? Well, WooCommerce and other typical websites. And once a good friend of mine invited me to collaborate on a Odoo project that was also e-commerce related. And I really fell in love with the way that the software was set up. It was actually my first Odoo project, and the developer experience was so good that I was actually interested in finding more work in that space. And eventually, with that same friend, we started Diginev as our first Odoo venture.
Great.
Awesome. We actually had a e-commerce company before, so John and I, and we basically built it out on Shopify, and we really liked it. We then moved to Magento, and after selling the company, because we got acquired and blah, blah, and that's why we went to Magento, because we had to. But then when we sold the company, we basically went back to our first love, which was Shopify. Shopify has evolved massively, from that point in time. I think it's 10 years ago. And so, now I'm still working on Shopify in the service business that we now started, which is The Digital.
Insane. I think it would be interesting to have a bit of a comparison between both softwares. And maybe let's just start on very practical things. What compares to each software? Maybe Sam, you can just lay a bit of the steam, because as I understand it, Odoo is a huge business management software. What's Shopify then?
Yeah, so I would say that they're not at all the same. I mean, Odoo has some specific features that are close to what Shopify does, but it's also quite interesting to see both softwares evolve over time. Odoo is obviously has had a massive growth over the last couple of years. They also focused for quite some time on e-commerce and everything e-commerce specific. And on the Shopify things, obviously they evolved massively as well. And they mostly transitioned from like a mom and pop store kind of setup towards also a software that can handle a lot of business logic for automations and etc. But on the other hand, even within the involvement of Shopify is not an ERP system, right? So you do have your inventory in Shopify, but that doesn't mean that, you have complex things that you can add from an inventory perspective or a manufacturing perspective. So I would position it mostly like Shopify is very much focused on selling on different sales channels, while Odoo, in my brain, because I work mostly on the Shopify side of things, right, can power what you sell on that store. And this needs to be created. And so this is completely what Odoo then focuses on. And obviously you can run your company. Like maybe one more thing, like I would see Odoo as your operating system for your company. So it can also handle stuff for your employees, holidays and planning, etc.
Yeah.
While Shopify obviously doesn't focus on that. It's like a specific package of software that allows you to sell online as easily as possible. Not only online, because obviously they also have retail and stuff. So that's also big for them. But it's basically mostly focused on selling, I would say, and not operating your business on top of.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with Sam. Odoo is a full service ERP. So it's an all-in-one business software. It has come a long way. I know due to the recent hype, a lot of people have the feeling that Odoo is a hip and new technology, but it already has over 20 years of development behind it. So a lot of typical business flows already well embedded into the system. And e-commerce, as it is known in Odoo, is just one of the many apps that is available to that system. Definitely one of the apps that has seen a large evolution in the last couple of years, especially from like V15 to 16, 17, and 18. But it's just one of the many other different important business flows that Odoo can handle.
How many apps are there in Odoo?
Close to 100, where I would say like real apps, because Odoo has a big difference between like full service apps with like an UI and typical functionalities that the user would use. But Odoo also has a lot of little helper modules, you know, things that make a connection with a very specific other service. That's a module that's available to Odoo. For example, the SendCloud integration is something that Odoo has provided to its user free of use. But that's not a app on its own. It's part of the e-commerce and other sales-related apps. But when it comes to like small modules, like over a couple of hundreds, but when it comes to like real usable UI-based apps, close to 100. I think it's like 80 or 90.
Yeah, okay. Insane. I think it would be interesting just to focus a bit on what you then earlier said, more of the e-commerce, and just do a quick comparison in between both. Because in my head, I would then consider in, let's say, in Odoo terms, Shopify exists out of like maybe 4 or 5 modules. You have the online store, you have the POS system, you have the B2B setup, you have the flow, which is more of an automation logic. So they only have like a few modules, and then let's maybe compare those first, and then afterwards we can get into a bit more like, okay, but why are they different? And obviously the how is what we're getting into, or what is different. Do they both have a CMS, a content management system?
Well, yeah, obviously, that's an easy one.
How's reporting for both systems?
On the Odoo side, reporting is pretty solid. It wouldn't be the most extreme reporting you've ever seen, but most typical e-commerce companies would get a general idea of how they're doing.
Yeah, so I mean, analytics for Shopify, it's kind of a nuanced story already. I won't dive into it too much, but just to like say something about it. Google Analytics is obviously big when you have a website. They kind of screwed up a bit like a couple of years ago. So Shopify tried to fill in the void to also have a lot of web analytics within Shopify. So you obviously have everything from a sales perspective, which is also included in Shopify into beautiful dashboards, but also from a web analytics point of view. So they try to skate towards having a full dashboarding thing available, both from a events on the website perspective, but also from a sales perspective. So they try to integrate it very well.
Okay.
As you said, events and like sales, because I want to get into like inventory management, something very typical if we see into commerce companies. They have physical goods. How do both compare? How would you say it?
Yeah, so Odoo definitely has a full-service inventory management app that they use outside of e-commerce. That's one of the powers of Odoo, how the different modules and applications can actually work together. So the typical inventory flow that Odoo has in and of itself is directly tied to the e-commerce. So products being sold online will also generate the necessary moves, and will probably also generate the necessary reordering rules if that's set up correctly. So I would say that it's a pretty decent implementation of inventory management from an e-commerce perspective.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, inventory in terms of like, you purchase inventory as well, the whole purchasing flow.
Yeah, definitely. So even purchasing and manufacturing, all these different types of flows that can lead to new SKUs or new items in your inventory are completely comprised in the system already, and they are pretty plug and play with each other.
So from the Shopify perspective, there is quite a lot of change that happened over the last couple of years. Before, again, it was quite basic or very basic. Like, obviously, inventory is something that Shopify knows because, yeah, you cannot continue selling when you're out of stock. So, like, the simple things of how much inventory I have, that's included. But now they also build quite a lot of more or harder workflows because if you have an online store, you basically probably want to scale internationally. But by scale internationally, that means that you might have different locations, different warehouses, different things that you want to ship from different places. So that became a bit more robust, I would say, from a Shopify perspective, that you can do order routing based on specific logic. And then from a purchasing perspective, I would say, obviously, you can also have purchase orders, but that's not as robust, I think, as you would see in a typical ERP system. And then when it completely breaks, so to say, is when you get into manufacturing, because that's just something that Shopify doesn't even touch, right? It's not really necessary from their perspective. You do purchasing because you have to have inflow of goods that you later will sell. And the selling of that inventory is obviously also inside of Shopify, and then the order routing, like I just mentioned. But manufacturing is just typical ERP stuff. So there it really ends, I would say.
You can't purchase the ingredients of your cake and then sell the final product.
So maybe we turn into that later, but there are some stores that have a quite simple flow of manufacturing, and then you can organize that, but with an external app. So you see that obviously some apps fill in the void of this manufacturing type of process, but this is easy manufacturing, right?
Yeah.
Also, where I would say maybe one more thing about where it stops is in Odoo, you also have the warehousing part, like where are certain things like physically standing, right? This is also not something that Shopify has. It's just like, do I have 10 still? Where is it positioned in warehouse? It doesn't really matter. But so you don't manage your warehouse with it. You just sell the orders or the products basically.
So things like picking.
Yeah, exactly. That's not included.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe then, because I knew there was going to be a very strong point for Odoo, maybe a bit more around everything. There was the front end, the flexibility of the front end, the speed of the front end, the usability of the front end.
Yeah. For Odoo, it's a bit of a story in two parts. I think for the general use cases, right, people that want to design a nice and easy website with the website builder, it's a pretty decent experience, especially with the coming of V17. They have some AI functionality to really start off with an idea and give some details to your design that would have taken some manual labor. That's totally automated. But once you want to go to the territory of like very custom designs, then maybe the platform is somewhat restrictive. You don't always have the easiest experience to change how the website will look, right? It's kind of opinionated. The structure of the website is pretty set in stone. Yeah. It works with the QWeb engine, which is like very structured and doesn't really allow you to freeball it too much. Yeah. So that might be a...
That's a point that I do want to understand really well, because that's something I tell our customers quite often as well. You can build whatever you want in Odoo.
See, the problem is Odoo already has a lot of functionalities embedded into the system, right? So if you want to reuse that functionality, it's best for you to stay within the confines of what Odoo already has.
It has to do with time and budget there.
Yeah, it's a time and budget thing, but it's also the general idea of how the technology is set up, right? It's right now pretty static with the QWeb engine, right? So you have templates that are loaded on the time you load the page, but how would the UI evolve with certain clicks and certain events? That's much less flexible than other platforms. That might change soon, because Odoo has spent quite some time having a completely new UI framework developed. It's called the OWL framework, and it's very flexible, very powerful, and I'm very interested in seeing how they will start incorporating that into e-commerce. But without it, it's a little bit too static to really have those beautiful, fluid, modern designs that we see nowadays.
Nice. Sam, for you, and we haven't touched on page speed and loading in these things, but
Of course.
From what I understand from Odoo's side, I think it would be kind of similar for Shopify, to be really honest. Obviously, we call it the online store, the theme that you have natively in Shopify. They spend a lot of time and money on it because they want to make it as easy as possible. But with making it as easy as possible, there obviously come a lot of trade-offs. But if you're really, and I think they worked a lot to make it more flexible for people who really understand it well and who want to build whatever they want to build. So I think they're striking the balance very well in terms of making sure it's supported and that it's fast out of the box, but that it's flexible enough to do whatever you want to do. But obviously, there, like always, the quality of the people or the insight and the experience of the people that build on top of the platform is very important because you have to understand how you should build a theme in Shopify to make sure it stays as performant as Shopify gives you the themes out of the box. I once did a course about Core Web Vitals and stuff, and one of the people that initially worked at Google to really put those frameworks in the world, he started working at Shopify. So just to let you understand that they invest massively in trying to understand how a page is loaded, and maybe a lot of people that are listening to the podcast, they don't really necessarily understand how deep that goes, but it goes quite deep. And I think Shopify has invested massively in that. And then you obviously also have the same as the Odoo frameworks is they have the OWL framework, but Shopify also invested in their own more headless type of framework, which is indeed a JavaScript based framework that is called Hydrogen. They didn't do it from the start or make it from the start, which I understand that Odoo did, which is super interesting. But they basically bought a framework that was open source, and then they built Hydrogen on top of it to make it commerce opinionated. So basically what I'm saying, if you just summarize everything, they have the out-of-the-box themes that are really performant and that you can build on top of and have a lot of flexibility in. But if you really need all the flexibility in the world, then they also have this framework, which is kind of similar to how it's built in Odoo, which is called Hydrogen in the Shopify ecosystem.
Yeah, we haven't. It seems like a good time to touch upon it. The Hydrogen, the headless, these things have been mentioned now. And maybe Chris, you have an interesting experience there.
So I had the opportunity to develop a fully headless website on Odoo. Just for the viewers' information, what does a headless website entail? It basically means that you have a completely separate front-end experience, user experience outside of Odoo, while still maintaining the core functionality of Odoo. So usually it's a JavaScript web app or website that runs on a completely separate server, but communicates with the Odoo server to actually get all the important information like customer details, product details, and actually pushing the order through. We ended up doing that a year ago, and it was a pretty nice experience. And the biggest motivators for us to go in that direction was, first of all, the flexibility of having a completely open front-end framework, right? We did it in the era of 2023 to 2024. So the OWL framework was new, but not completely in the know yet. So we used Vue.js, which is a very well-known JavaScript framework to basically develop a completely new front-end experience. And with that flexibility, we also could really have a design that was fully tailor-made to that customer without really taking into consideration the typical structure of an Odoo website, because Odoo is very structured. So the way a header and the main body and the footer is set up, it's pretty particular. But in that instance, we had all the freedom in the world. It also allowed us to reach some very important website performance metrics when it comes to like just page speed and other web core vitals. And those two things were the most important ones.
Okay. So if I were to summarize it with headless, you can have just more freedom. You're not stuck. Stuck is the wrong wording, but you're not limited to the Odoo environment. Probably the same for Shopify. You have more freedom there. Whereas, as I know, it also comes with an extra costs, not only in terms of budget, but also in terms of like maintenance and extra complexity in terms of like software.
Of course, which is a very important thing for Odoo, because Odoo as an ERP is very interesting, because unlike a lot of other ERPs, Odoo is actually constantly evolving, right? A new version every year. That's not very typical for most ERPs. If you look at like an SAP or Microsoft Dynamics or whatever other ERP, these are usually versions that are stuck in the time, and it takes like a really long time before they upgrade. Odoo, that's not the case. It's very typical for like a very conscious Odoo customer to like migrate every 2 years, and that does put a lot of strain on like the whole stack of a customer base. But the cool thing with headless is that's something that's basically taken out of the equation, right? So you could basically continue evolving the front end, even though the back end is maybe going through a migration or other structural changes, as long as the API that you communicate with stays the same. A headless website actually gives you the opportunity to evolve on 2 separate tracks.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe that's something that I didn't write down, but innovation is an interesting one. You mentioned once a year, Odoo is upgrading the whole stack.
Indeed.
How is it for Shopify?
So it's 2 times a year. There is a summer and a winter edition. And so what Shopify tries to do is they try to always migrate or push out new stuff, because you have a SaaS subscription and you basically pay Shopify to innovate. And so the system is very much built around the ability for Shopify to, in the backend, actually continuously update and not breaking the experience that the merchant or the customer has. So they do have 2 very specific moments where they announce a lot of updates, but there are throughout the year constant updates happening as well. New features, new APIs, etc., that are coming out basically also not on those distinct times, but in between. And that's actually really important and interesting from an architectural point of view, because you need to build stuff in a way, again, that if Shopify pushes updates from their side, things don't break for us. So it's kind of an interesting mindset from a development perspective, and we call it within the Shopify ecosystem extensibilities. So you basically, you have, I always say it's like a little door that Shopify gives you, basically. And so they provide doors into their system, but they tell you how you should use that door, so that when they create in the back room that they have access to, if they change stuff around, they know that if you build it in the right way through this door, or how you should use the door, that the things that you build on top of it will migrate together with the Shopify updates, which is kind of interesting, because again, you pay to Shopify, and it's really nice that, because the commerce world changes like crazy. Now we have everything AI related. Maybe we're going to discuss it, maybe not. But constant change is potentially necessary. And by doing this, Shopify allows them to continuously innovate while keeping the changes or the customizations intact for the user and the merchant.
Yeah, totally.
I think we're slowly getting into the area that I'm also excited to talk about. Is we've talked about a bit of the features, and I think we can have a whole day around just comparing features. So I think a whole day around things that Shopify doesn't have and Odoo does have. But I think in the core, it's just a difference in philosophy of software. Maybe Chris, you can talk a bit around what the philosophy is actually of then Fabien and why he started the company and how Odoo is today.
Yeah, I think one of the most important takeaways for Odoo is the fact that it's really supposed to be a all-in-one business solution. So it's definitely trying to be good at every single use case that it can serve, but it has to be realistic in its pursuits, right? So even every version that you have has a very specific roadmap in mind. So it's very possible that certain modules over a span of a year don't really change that much. That's a reality. But the other modules that were on the roadmap will definitely have some groundbreaking changes. So it's hard to predict where the future is for every single app on the ecosystem because you only really know it for up to a year in advance. Once the Odoo 19 version will come out in September, somewhere along of the October, November, so we already would get a roadmap for Odoo 20.
Yeah.
And it's really trying to be a generalist software. It's very obvious once you start using it, right? Odoo is very flexible, extensible, and open. It's not trying to be the best at everything. It's trying to be a very good base case and really allowing the Odoo ecosystem to give the customers the necessary flexibility to, fill in the gaps together with their partners if necessary to really get to that sweet spot where they basically have the system that they need.
So all of the apps working together is like the use case for Odoo then.
Yeah, indeed. So by design, everything is really connected with each other. There's basically no such thing as a completely isolated app. There are no silos. Like automatically, once you make a sale order, there's automatically like a delivery created. And if the delivery is happening, there's also some stock moves going on. So everything is really well integrated. And the philosophy is really all about getting every app working together in harmony and getting the base case right.
Yeah. If you were to put it against Shopify, how is Shopify in that regard?
Yeah, I think also just evolving very quickly, but very focused on commerce, right?
Of course.
So it's actually a hard philosophical question. I don't always know what to say about it, other than in Shopify, you have a lot of people in the ecosystem that are only focused at making this commerce solution better. And yeah, that comes with a lot of upgrades and a lot of new things that they make. Especially in a time where everything changes, like we are more or less currently in. That's interesting. But in another way of thinking, you could also say, I think there are, from what I have seen, and I've seen a lot of Odoo setups as well, there are a lot of building blocks in Odoo on top of which you can build a lot of things. So you could actually also argue, which is just interesting from a Dear Digital perspective, because we do both, that if you have a commerce way of thinking, because we know commerce so well from a Shopify side of things, we can actually also build a lot into Odoo, because we kind of know how to look at commerce and what to do with those building blocks that Odoo has. But as you have, and I think we will move into that as well, best of breed and best of suite software, there is obviously still a bit of a difference between certain things that are done in a best of breed versus a best of suite, because you just have so many people focused on one specific thing that they want to solve, which is commerce. And up until this point in time, next to retail and B2B commerce online, Shopify also has this single focus still.
Yeah. Would you agree?
No, I totally agree. I think it would be crazy to assume that Odoo has the same focus on commerce as Shopify has. That's just not the case. I do think that Odoo is an ambitious company and they're doing great things every single year, but the scope is just way broader. They are concerned with over 80 business apps. Not all of them get as much attention, but you get the idea. They're constantly trying to gauge the market on the total business landscape and filling the gaps for a new segment of the market for ERP software. And sometimes that might be e-commerce, but the other time that might be rental, and the other time might be completely something else.
If you were to represent it like visually, would it be okay if I said Odoo is mostly expanding on the horizontal side of things, and Shopify has chosen like a few horizontals and is going vertically way deeper? Or would you say, well, like you said before, each roadmap in Odoo chooses like, hey, we should go deeper into that module, we should go deeper into those business needs then, or?
Yeah, I think that might change, but today that's definitely the case. So they are focused, thank God. I don't think it would be a successful idea to just try to do everything at the same time. So what I really like about Odoo is they're very realistic about what they can achieve in a year, and they have a very good focus on those specific tasks they set up for themselves. But it's always a very specific subset. It's like maybe 15% of the total scope that they really zoom in on and try to improve. And that's just the reality of it.
Yeah. And so from my perspective, I just also want to add, like, and this is, we're both solution architects. What we actually want to do and what Odoo and Shopify also separately want to do is try to have the best possible solution for a specific customer. And it's very important to understand what this customer is, because a lot of customers, they only see themselves, which makes a ton of sense because they need to focus on their business, right? But they don't necessarily always understand how different customers might be.
Yeah.
And now which I love, but we're saying Shopify versus Odoo, or like, which are the differences? But you can also argue like, yeah, there are just several companies, and because we understand those businesses quite well, the platforms quite well, we have to try and understand the business very well to just then see how that maps on only Odoo, Shopify and Odoo, only Shopify, and that's even more important, that in these kinds of discussions you don't really necessarily also understand is how that might evolve over time, because they might go for Shopify specifically because they want, for example, grow very rapidly online, but then see, because they were so successful, that they need ERP, they have more employees, they want to manage those employees, they want to manage their planning, they want to manage their vacation, their holidays, etc. And then you need an operating system for your business, not only to have commerce. And so then you start to move in the interesting direction, which is what I think we are both very much excited about. Is that you try to just come up with a solution based on Odoo and Shopify and potentially something else, right? But yeah. I think we cover quite a lot with those two platforms to see where we should go next. And this is, where the super interesting stuff also happens. So it's really dependent basically on what you need and what is important for your growth.
I think we've seen a lot of our customers do both. We're obviously a fan of having both. Why, you said because of a certain business reason of understanding certain business, why would a customer go for Shopify as sales channels, and why would they have Odoo more as the ERP system?
Honestly, I think if you haven't been living under a rock, it's non-negotiable. It's a reality that Shopify has really been a dominant player in the e-commerce sphere, and a lot of these customers know that, and it's not abnormal for a customer to already have made the decision in their mind that they want to sell on Shopify, and even if they don't have that preconceived notion, it's still the number one storefront and the number one checkout in the world right now. I think something that as a mainly Odoo solution architect that I think is so amazing about Shopify is how easy and fuss-free the checkout process is. As someone who even made a headless experience, Odoo is super powerful, super great, but just by design of how some of these data structures are set up, the checkout itself is a little bit more awkward, right? You have to create the customer in the backend as a REST partner object. You have to do some data validation. So naturally, the checkout in Odoo is always in a multi-step process. And for a lot of people, that seems like a very minor detail and not important. But as you get to the higher level of selling, you really understand that the art of removing friction in the checkout is really something that we can't underestimate. And Shopify really has done it in a very elegant way where the money is magically like disappearing out of your pocket. It's like very sleek, very easy, and that is something that Odoo hasn't reached yet. I think it has the necessary tools to do so, and I'm pretty sure it will get there in the nearby future. But that kind of selling firepower is kind of missing in Odoo right now, and I understand that trying to have it into your total customer experience is very valuable, to the point where you would actually separate the e-commerce and maybe more than e-commerce, right? Some of the retail operations to Shopify, but still rely on the very robust and powerful features of Odoo when it comes to accounting, manufacturing, inventory, etc., etc.
Yeah,
Exactly. Fully agree.
Yeah.
be it for each, for Shopify, for Odoo, are there examples where you would say Shopify only works really well or Odoo only works really well?
Also, maybe I can go first for we started our company 5 years ago, whatever. We had a lot of startups and scale-ups. It also depends a bit on the kind of product that you sell, but there are a lot of, so it's kind of hard to put them into buckets because it depends a bit on how you sell and what you sell. But there are a lot of companies who grew to 10 million in sales only being on Shopify. And again, it points a bit towards what we discussed before, is if you don't have manufacturing or you don't have your own warehouses, or you don't have a lot of people that you need to manage, basically, right? Because then you need your operating system for your company, and that typically goes towards Odoo. Then you can actually sell a lot on Shopify. So those are the typical companies that only are on Shopify, but it's kind of a weird setup because you still need to operate your business somehow, right?
Excel.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Or there is a lot of, invoicing and stuff, bookkeeping. It's very important. And then you have other tools, but it makes a lot of sense to then also go to Odoo from the moment that you need this type of stuff. And that's where Odoo is also so smart, because is it still free when you use like one app or something?
Yeah,
so you can grow into it, and when you need a certain thing, you can go to Odoo and then make it broader what you're doing on Odoo. So I would say, yes, there are a lot of brands that we saw that are only on Shopify, but they then manage stuff in a weird and awkward way in Google Sheets, like you say, where they actually would have also benefited from using Odoo. So I would say, with the very small threshold that Odoo has, there shouldn't be too many companies, to be really honest, that only use Shopify, because from the moment you have a company, you better just start playing around with the very low threshold stuff that Odoo has to offer you, which is very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Well, for me, the answer would be a little bit more nuanced. I think I have like 3 buckets in my mind that totally make sense. The first bucket is a pretty similar one as Sam said. I think Shopify for like very early startups can be very cheap, but I don't think it's as cheap as free. So you can actually get started on Odoo for completely nothing, which seems like a great idea for people that are really just trying to get their feet wet, see where they can get with the system. And it's already the type of system that can easily handle large enterprises. So already being there from the start is not even a bad decision because you can really grow into that next level. Otherwise, what I kind of see happen a lot in Odoo implementations is like companies that already have a very specific sales flow that didn't really have any online sales channel, and they just tack it on because it's free at that point, right? The licenses of Odoo give you access to all the apps for the same price. So oftentimes they already have some B2B sales that they do online via email, and then they're like, well, we could really use a web portal. Well, it's totally free in your license anyway. And then they get the ball rolling in that instance. And sometimes we do see that businesses already at a pretty high level where you would think that a Shopify would make a lot of sense, but their business flow is so peculiar that the total set of functionalities available in Odoo makes it a no-brainer. I'm thinking about the native support for subscriptions straight out of e-commerce. So the first two buckets totally made sense, but a third bucket, which would seem where Shopify is also a very good fit, is companies that are very e-commerce heavy, but maybe because of their very specific functionality needs, the total package of Odoo makes too much sense to ignore it. I'm thinking about companies that maybe have some subscription flows that they need to allow to be started from the front end, the e-commerce. Odoo has native support for that quite easily. The handling of CRM leads from the website back to a different sales team that might really go into it. So the different types of customers that have really specific needs, they might be surprised by how much things Odoo already does natively in the completely same license as whatever other business would actually pay for.
Yeah. We've touched it a bit, and obviously we've talked quite a bit about it as well before. But there's this concept within like the software architecture called two-speed systems. One system just going at rapid innovation, moving fast, just making sure that growth is as fast as possible. And then you have the first speed, which is slower, more stable. What's your take on it? Because we've looked at like more monolithic stack, just the best of suite, the philosophy of like, let's say mostly Odoo. But then you have the best of breed, and they tend way more towards like the microservices just together with like a shitload of APIs needing to be connected together.
Yeah.
Because you have like 15 softwares that need to seamlessly talk to each other, but you might need 5 other engineers just to support all of those systems.
True.
And there's supposedly this in-between version, two-speed systems.
Yes. Maybe I can just say something about it. I think it makes a lot of sense from what I have seen, because there are a lot of ERP-related things that just pretty much probably will remain quite static. Obviously, you need to do changes and upgrades, etc.
Yeah.
But having inventory in your warehouse and stuff, I mean, you want that to be very stable, bookkeeping, etc. Once somebody told me, because this is something obviously that also grows in our minds as we progress through our own business and seeing different kinds of customers, that sometimes, because a lot of things that we actually do with customers is change management, and change management is really hard. And some people just said, like, why do you want even a system? Why do you want a system that grows so fast or like innovates so fast? Because then you need to constantly do a lot of change management. So even from a psychological perspective in companies, you would want to have a two-speed system, because a lot of people just use the operating system of your company, and that doesn't need to necessarily change too much, because you will basically create too much chaos in the company. But when you then separate out, and I think it's mostly like marketing and sales kinds of flows, I would think you just need to be on top of your game, because you have a lot of competition out there, and you basically need to make sure you sell and you capture the market. And you better be very fast in this very fast moving technology based world, where all of a sudden AI comes along and you have to start selling in chatbots or whatever, or marketplaces all of a sudden become huge. So you have to be able to be flexible to jump on those things. Separately, you are maybe growing as a company very hard and having to have different kinds of customer segments and thus also specific experiences per kind of customer segment. You better make sure that the people who run this storefront or this commerce thing that you have be able to test stuff out and that they can rely on huge ecosystems of apps that have solved certain things already for you instead of you having to reinvent the wheel, basically.
Yeah.
So I think that it makes a lot of sense from a OS operating system perspective, and then bolting on top of it marketing and sales, that you indeed have kind of two separate speeds. And maybe one more thing that I once saw with a customer that I found very smart, maybe you already know it, but it's a bit of a weird word or a way of thinking, but you want to set yourself up that if you have separate systems, that you keep the separate systems dumb, so to say, so that you're not too much like dependent on the other system. So, for example, if you have then Shopify and Odoo, you want to make sure that if you need to have an integration, which we're now saying in my example that you need, you don't want, if you want to change things in Shopify, that you're also always dependent of the system that you're integrated with, which is Odoo. So you need to set it up in an architectural way so that you have the freedom to change whatever you want to change within Shopify, because otherwise you're actually dependent on the speed system that is a bit slower, which you don't want to get. You want to have this separation and have the flexibility to do what you want in the system that allows you to move maybe way faster than the operating system does. This is not to say that obviously Odoo doesn't, or like you say before, because then you might understand why SAP and Microsoft Dynamics went slowly, because they didn't have those challenges from a sales and marketing perspective. So this is obviously also not the correct way of thinking about it, because obviously Odoo also needs to change and get better, but it's in a different way than the other types of systems typically are pressured to move.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with Sam's take here. I also feel like the two-speed systems approach also really became quite natural in like the technology world, like the sudden boom of headless architectures, etc. People are realizing that some parts of a system just need to evolve way faster than other parts, and it totally makes sense, right? Like if it's a ERP system where like 50 employees every day have to log their timesheets and whatever, if that's the system that's constantly being developed, which will inevitably come with downtime and regressions and stuff like that, that doesn't make sense for a business to run in that way. But other systems that are, well, let's say not only customer facing, but just much more flexible in nature, it's really nice to really take those opportunities. As Sam said, the aspect of competition is something that a lot of business owners are not really thinking about, because it's very real and it's hard to quantify sometimes, but being able to keep up with like the newest trends is not something that's just there for bragging rights. It's actually there for like real purposes. Like it can really affect the gross margin, the revenues that you can achieve. And by allowing you to have that flexibility where you have one system that really does everything you need it to do day by day on a very consistent and surefire way, but also having a outlet to really have the most change and the most experimental evolutions, I think that's a very great setup to strive for.
Not to mention the talent, right? Because if you have certain people that you want to attract, they also want to work with certain systems.
Of course.
Obviously, you can push them a bit in a certain direction, but if you want access to the best talent, and one of the things is that they just work with those type of systems, you better make sure that you maybe also are working on those systems, because otherwise you need to first start with migrating them to a different way of thinking. So it's also interesting from a talent perspective, I would say.
Awesome, guys. I think we've touched quite a few subjects, and I think we've wrapped up a bit at least, but I think we can talk for days on end around the differences, but also how they could collaborate together, how it would be a good fit.
Definitely.
So I'm actually excited to do more of that. But for this podcast, I would say let's wrap it up. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.